40,000 foot operator? What has to be in place for us to be able to get to that point?
Day-to-day work does not depend on you. When you're wearing all the hats, things are not getting done very well.
You've got to be very strategic about what are things I'm going to truly invest my energy into.
Really good business owners tend to view the business as an adventure. It's not a task. It's not a threat. Really good business owners tend to like it.
Less stress, more time, more money. Welcome to the Cashflow Contractor Deep Dive.
Martin, we had a great conversation with Robert Keys. What is it, 2 months
Yes,
ago
we
or
did.
so? And he was running for state senate. Does you know what happened there?
It's ongoing.
Ongoing. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Well,
we don't know yet.
Fascinating man. He's done a really great job at running a profitable business, acquiring companies. And one of the things that he mentioned in that episode was that he tries to be a 40,000 foot operator. And we really didn't dive too much into that. And so we wanted to dive into it today and really explore what that could look like. A lot of this is just kind of our thought process and, what we've seen and what we think about when we think of a 40,000 foot operator. But I'd like to kind of go through today from ground level operator to 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 foot operator, and what the differences are in each of those stages of your evolution as a business owner. And I think it'll be a fun one. I wanted to start though, before we get into, becoming that 40,000 foot operator, let's just define what does it mean for a business to be at a level where there can be a 40,000 foot operator, because not every business can really have that. What has to be in place for us to be able to get to that point?
You mean as if you were already a 40,000 foot operator?
Well, just what does that business look like? If there's a business that has a 40,000 foot operator, what does that business really look like?
Well, okay. Then really the owner, I've got a great example. There was a company in Oklahoma City, a pretty good size supply house for roofing and stuff. And the private equity guys came out and were all over them, wanted to buy them. And what really clinched the deal was they went out to the shop, the warehouse, and nobody in the warehouse knew who the owner was. Didn't know that was the owner.
Yeah.
So there you go in a nutshell. And this guy, when he started the company, I know him pretty well. He would check the tires on the trucks for delivery before he got in and drove the truck to deliver. He loaded the trucks, he checked the tires, he drove. So he started at that level, which was definitely ground level.
Yeah.
And by the time he was done, simply stated, nobody out in the shop in operations knew who he was. And that, of course, tickles, if you can tickle a venture capitalist, not a venture capitalist, private equity guys, that tickled their fancy, because that's a good sign.
Yeah.
That means somebody else can come in and run it, do well. So that's it in a nutshell. But basically, you've learned a lot of lessons. You're highly leveraged, both in terms of you make money off of people who work for you and off of capital that you utilize. You make your time, you get this free time because you reach the point where you hire specialists, let's call them professionals, such as a CFO, marketing expert, HR person. Maybe you're big enough, you've got your own IT people, but you're starting to hire specialists rather than you doing it all the time. And you have the opportunity to focus on working on your business. Like my friend who sold it, there was a point there where he decided to sell, and there's a lot to do when you actually sell. Yeah. And he was free to do all those things. So there's more, but basically that's where you are. Day-to-day work does not depend on you. Operations, day-to-day operation work.
Yeah, I think we've done an episode in the past on the 9 essentials of an organized business. And I think you need to be an organized business in order for there to be the potential of being a 40,000 foot operator. And those 9 essentials, we've gone through these before, but vision, mission, culture, goals or planning, however you want to phrase it. And then an org chart with job descriptions and systems and KPIs, and then even how-tos of just actually doing the work. When you have all those things in place, you have a shot at being a 40,000 foot operator. In addition to that, you need to have really good data. You need to be able to know your numbers and know your customers, and know your goals and the KPIs like we mentioned earlier. But those are just some attributes of that business that needs that. So if you're listening to this, you don't have a lot of that stuff, you can still become a 40,000 foot operator, but it's not happening today. There's a lot of steps to get there. So let's go to that ground level. Oh, go ahead.
Well, real quickly too, we did another episode called The Evolution of a Business Owner.
Yes.
Way back a couple of years ago. And that's worth listening to. What we're talking about today parallels that.
Yeah.
Right. So go ahead.
Well, let's jump into what it's like to be an operator. Let's start at the ground level. This is what I call a high risk job. What do you think about when you think of this ground level operator?
Well, you're doing the work, and by work, I mean you're doing all the work, including the operational work. You're not leveraged. You're trading time for money, which is the definition of having a job. High risk because if you're working for somebody else, they're obligated to pay you. No matter how well it's going. If you're working for yourself, there's no such obligation, and frequently you're the one who doesn't get paid. So, and it's a high risk because in the trades or the construction and the areas we talk about, oftentimes if you're driving a truck and metaphorically handling a shovel, that works until your back goes out and then you're done. You either quit or you move on up the hierarchical ladder. And it's better to move up that hierarchy before you have to than as a result of an accident.
Yeah. And I don't want to poo-poo on this too much. There are ways of being a ground level operator and still being extremely successful if you approach it the right way. Like, for example, if you're the only person in your business, you have excellent margins, you charge a premium, you operate extremely lean, and you use your money to invest in other things. I've seen this happen before where there's a really talented plumber who does things on their own. They've got their own vehicle. They own everything they operate with, and they do it themselves. And then they take their extra money and they use that to invest in real estate. And they do that for 30 years. You can still do that and be successful. Yes, it's high risk.
Sure.
Yes, you're reliant upon only yourself, but if you make that conscious decision and you know the game that you're playing and what's required to really succeed at that game, you can be a ground level operator. But that's just not the most common thing that we see.
Only thing I add to that is that guy's a real estate agent.
Exactly.
I mean, not an agent. He's a real estate business.
That's the game he's playing.
Yeah.
And he recognizes
it's different. It's a different business. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but if you're not running at high profit margins, if you're just relying on the jobs you're doing to be your paycheck and to keep you, alive today and not necessarily for tomorrow and the retirement and all that stuff, that's not really where you want to be. Go and work for somebody else and get the 401k plan and don't have the risk of, your back going out and not being able to get disability insurance and whatever it is, workman's comp, right? So that's, there are advantages if you do it the right way to staying at that ground level. You don't have to worry about people. There's a little bit less stress with dealing with people. You can control everything. You set your schedule. But with that freedom and those advantages comes a lot of responsibility, a lot of risk that you're subjecting yourself to. So, I bet there's a lot of people listening at that ground level know the game that you're playing. Let's jump to the 10,000 foot level. I think there's going to be probably a lot of our listeners will be in these next two stages. So what does that jump look like? When you think of 10,000 foot level, what's happening with that operator?
Well, paralleling our evolution of a business owner, the 10,000 foot level is you hire somebody to help you.
Yeah.
Right. You're still going out on the jobs, but you've got a helper. Maybe that helper can actually go do one job while you're doing another, that kind of thing. So you're beginning to get leveraged. Theoretically, you're making money off of somebody else's effort. So you charge more to work that person than you pay that person. So you're making money on that. It's a good phase to pass through because you're going to learn so much, what it takes to manage people, how to give clear instructions, delegation, the fact that people don't always show up, the best laid plans of mice and men after gang of glee, as Robert Burns says, it doesn't quite work out the way you thought. And so you wind up with more work because you have one or two people and then they don't show up and now you're doing more work. So it can be great. It can be wonderful. But when you hire people, it is a complicating freaking factor. End of discussion. And, sometimes it works out really well and sometimes it doesn't. But you will face those challenges of how to efficiently use other people's time and talents to your benefit. So it definitely fits the bill of you have to do more work before you do less work. But as you're going through 10,000, Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah.
I don't know that 10,000 feet is always hell, but if you're going through 10,000 foot level, keep going because generally that's not where you want to get stuck. I mean, you might get a perfect person you can work with for 30 years, whatever, but that's typically not what happens.
Yeah. I was trying to think of, like on the ground level, I tried to make a case for here's how you would stay there, right? Like kind of a strategy potentially. And the 10,000 foot's a really hard one because you're not operating as lean as you possibly could probably because you have people around you and you're paying, now your labor costs become extreme. You probably want to keep going or remove yourself from that model, right? I think with this one, I think it's important that we defined, because we're going to mention this a few times, but define what a key man is. And this goes back to even your analogy or your story at the beginning of your friend who owned a supply house and nobody knew who he was. He wasn't a key man. If he was removed from that operation, it would still be operating most likely, right? And when you're a key man, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just you, it could be a person that you've hired where everything's riding on that person because there's a silo in your business where only they know how things are done or where things are located or how to do things the way that they need to for this client. They are the only one with the skill set required for the role that you've created in the business that has, is able to speak 5 languages and be an engineer and do the actual construction and be a influencer on social media, right? Like this unicorn of a person. That is what's making you the key man, where you're really not replaceable to a certain extent. And when you're at that 10,000 foot level, you're really operating on a hub spoke management where you are the hub and you've hired support for all the different areas to keep the wheel moving. And you are still that key person that's the hub. So I think that's a really crucial thing to identify as, if you're the key person, you're managing people, but they're really just supporting you. You're really in operations at a core level. You're helping with everything that keeps the business going. You're on jobs. You're trying to push through and get more revenue. That's really what you're at that 10,000 foot level. So, I think you're learning delegation, you're learning accountability, you're learning the importance of systems, you're learning the necessity of software to run your business, but you're still involved in everything. So, definitely a difficult place to be, and probably making that decision of, man, do I just want to go back to the ground level? Do I want to go work for somebody else? Or how am I going to get to that 20,000 foot or even 30,000 foot level?
We talk about it in the evolution of a business owner, but we call this the push through stage. I'm thinking actually of a couple of companies where you have an owner and a long-term sidekick, Tonto and the Lone Ranger kind of deal. And they're doing great.
Yeah.
But that's just an anomaly, right? So, but generally I have heard more people tell me, many people tell me, I made more money when it was just me.
Yep.
I'm going to fire everybody and sell those trucks and go back to doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it's true. They made more money when it was just him or her. But you need to decide, because if you go back, you're back to you're not leveraged. It's a high risk job. If you hurt your back, you're out of business. If you don't have a plan like buying that real estate, like you're talking about, then it's, what's the future there? So you have to decide, am I going to go back or am I going to push through? And I like to see people, it's their own decision. Because if they're not committed to pushing through, then maybe they do need to go back.
Yeah.
But I like to see people decide to go through. And then we start talking about what does it take to get to the next, what are we at, 20,000 square feet, 20,000 feet elevation.
Okay. So we're flying the plane. We're building it while we're flying it. We're trying to get to that 20,000 foot. What does that look like? The way that I define this one, I think one of the biggest indicators is that you're one step removed from the job, right? You've finally got the project manager that is the one that's responsible for the job. So you're one step removed from it finally. You've broken the barriers of that hub spoke where everything runs through you. And now you've got another hub that can actually manage the day-to-day jobs. And you still are managing that project manager. You're still probably involved in even bidding the jobs, maybe, making sure that materials are there for the job or something along those lines. But you don't have to actually be on the job site every single day, and you can start to work on the business a little bit more. I think that's one of the biggest indicators is you're one step removed from the job. What do you think?
Well, I think you're correct that you show up to work every day, but you're not necessarily working on operations. And I think a lot of people from 20,000 and below consider working to be the operations. We're bidding, selling, performing, ordering materials, coordinating people to do the job. And I like to always reiterate that operations is not your business. It's 1/4 of your business. You have to do everything else, all the administrative stuff, the leadership stuff, planning stuff, the goal-oriented stuff, maintain the culture, hire and fire, incentivize people. And in the marketing, you have to hopefully direct somebody rather than you doing it. There are unicorns out there, as you like to call people, who really love marketing and do it instinctively. They're doing it at 10 o'clock at night because they want to. Right? I don't include myself among that. And couldn't imagine anything worse. But there are people, so you get people to do that. But somebody has to pay attention to those other three areas. And so you move yourself gradually from primary responsibility for production. So you got somebody else doing it, and you can start paying attention to the other areas of business that are critical.
Yeah. Yeah, I think essentially when you get to this level, you finally have another key person. You're not the only key man. You're still a key man, but you have another one with you that can help with the project side. Typically, it can be with other areas, but that's just typically where it starts. You've got a project manager that can help you basically duplicate your efforts, and you're growing. Maybe you have multiple key men, but you're still a key person in the day-to-day operations. I liked what you said about hats. And I think this is a good transition point for us to talk about that, where instead of like a role or a task or a project or whatever, there's hats in your business. And when you're at the 20,000 foot level, you have delegated, you do have a team in place. You've even got some systems in place. Things are running without you to some degree, but you're still wearing every single hat. At the end of the day, you're still responsible for basically everything. How did you describe it?
Well, that's partly all four areas of business, the guiding, getting, doing, administration. Somebody has to deal with all of that. Otherwise, you're going to go out of business. You're going to run out of cash, or you're going to get sued for firing somebody the wrong way, or insurance is going to lap, or you're not going to get any. I mean, somebody has to deal with all that. And up to this point in most businesses, up to this, coming to 20 to 30,000 feet, it's the owner who's in charge of it. I think our listeners will recognize that. They do it when they have time, when they're not doing what they do most, which is usually doing operations. Well, there's a couple of things about the owner doing it. And one is that they typically won't have time, or at least not to do all the things and not to do them well. And two, they're not very good at them. Now, they may take offense at my comments, but looking back over 500 clients, I'm trying to think how many I ran into that were natively good at keeping books, and not very damn many, right? There are some. I mean, there are some, but not many. And of course, we've talked enough about books to understand why they're important and to your success. So when you're wearing all the hats, things are not getting done very well. That's just a general statement, but I'm unabashed in making it. Everything is just not being done well. And this might be moving us to the next level, but typically, I'll just throw out some numbers between 5 million in sales and 10 million in sales, closer to 10 million in sales. Companies start to be much better run much better. That's a more easy way to say that. And I think the main reason for that is that the owner has hired hats. They got a CFO. They got an HR person. I think I said this earlier. They got an IT person, maybe if that's the size of your company. Got an insurance specialist. You've got a marketing and sales director and marketing director could be hired, but you have specialists that do those, and it's no longer up to the owner. And things get quantitatively better because you start to get that better data that you were talking about earlier with which to make decisions. You start having the time to look at that data, understand what it's telling you and how it's helping direct you, as opposed to showing up on the job and getting the pickup stuck in the mud, spending your day out there.
Yeah. I think with, we're talking about this 40,000 foot level. The nice thing about being at 40,000 feet is that you can see further, right? And I think at this ground level, the 10,000 foot, even the 20,000 foot, you're really narrowed in how far you can see and how long you plan and what you even think about. And obviously on the ground level, you're thinking more day to day. And the 10,000 foot level, you might be thinking week to week. But even at the 20,000 foot level, I think you're still in the short term thinking of less than a year. And that really limits you because you have so many different hats that you're wearing. Your capacity is limited to how far you can think into the future because you've got to maintain and manage what's in front of you. And so I think that's a big characteristic, that you're still not thinking really long term. Sure, you maybe have some thoughts, but you're not being detailed and strategic and calculated in how you think about the future. It's more of a concept, right? So that's another thing that I want to mention. You mentioned, let's go back to the hats. It's really not until you get to that 30,000 foot level that you've actually delegated some of the hats, not just the work, but you've got people that can be responsible for those areas, right?
Yeah. I mean, you might have one that you picked up early, a project manager or something like that, but typically, no, you haven't hired them yet. And part of the reason is you don't think you're making enough money to do it. It's a chicken and the egg thing all the time. At some point you have to delegate things to people.
Yeah.
Well, they're not ready. Well, how are they going to get ready? I mean, you will have spent time developing systems and things like that, but you've got to hand a difficult decision off to a trusted ally and let them make that decision, get comfortable making and making such decisions. Certainly screw some of them up, but you have to be willing to hand that off. I don't remember what book just recently read, and I've read it before, that if you've got somebody in your outfit that can do what you do 70% as well, give it to them.
Yeah.
70% of their time or 70% as well frees up 100% of your time. You're way better off.
Yeah. I think this is where, when you get to that 30,000 foot level, you finally found some hats that are for people to wear these hats in your business. It allows you to be 2 steps removed from a job, not just 1 step. Example, right. I've got a project manager now who's on the job. I'm 1 step removed. My project manager quits. My project manager's sick. My project manager has a problem. Who are they calling? They're calling me. I get a, VP of operations or a chief operating officer in place. Now I'm 2 steps removed. The project manager's gone. That's the COO's responsibility. That's the VP's responsibility.
Right.
We need to hire somebody to be a new project manager. I'm not thinking about that. Right. That's somebody else that's wearing that hat that's now responsible for it. And it allows me to operate at just a higher level where I'm truly not thinking about what jobs are happening today because that's someone else's responsibility. I think that really allows you to elevate yourself above the clouds and kind of see further into the future to have more capacity to work on the business. And this is where you take even a deeper look at the data inside your company and where that data becomes much more valuable. The numbers inside of your financials, your KPIs for marketing and for sales, and where you're headed in forecasting. You have the capacity now to start thinking about those things, and they're necessary because you're not thinking just about the day-to-day, week-to-week, even just this year. You're thinking about where are we going to be in the next 3 years? What's our next area of expansion possibly? What's the next area that we're going to start targeting? So I think that's a big thing. 2 steps removed from the job or from the day-to-day work.
Right. Yeah, I like that description. You don't want those day-to-day phone calls.
No, not at all. I think another attribute at this level is because you've delegated so much and you're not wearing those hats, I'm sure that you probably get fairly lost if you're used to being at the ground level, 10,000 level and 20,000 level, because the tyranny of the urgent really dictated what your to-dos were, right? Oh, what's happening on the day-to-day job? What's happening in our work? And without your email inbox or your cell phone calls being what dictates your schedule each day or each week, you kind of get lost in, hey, what should I focus on? And so being able to prioritize and really find, the capacity to focus is a big aspect of being at that 30,000 foot level and being that operator. And you've got to be very strategic about what are the 1 or 2 things I'm going to truly invest my energy into. Yes, I'm still the CEO. I have people reporting to me. I'm coaching them through things. I'm making sure that we're all headed in the right direction, that all of our ships are moving forward and have the right compass. But I still have time that I've got to focus on 1 or 2 priorities for myself. And what are those things? Anyways, that's kind of what I think about the 30,000 foot level. Is there anything we've missed there?
No. One thing I think about is if we have any pilots listening to airplane pilots, is pilots learn to do a scan. You're constantly scanning your instruments, RPM, fuel, oil pressure, attitude, bank. I mean, you think some of this stuff you can just tell, but depending on the weather conditions, you can't. But they need to know they're constantly looking. Nowadays with GPS and all the fancy new stuff, you just look at the little airplane as it going down the line. But when you step out of the day-to-day operations, you can start to develop a scan that's kind of about the current. You need to go beyond that, which we're talking about next. But what are the next things coming? But you have a quick way to look and judge the health of your company, which direction. I forgot to mention compass heading when you're in an airplane. Where am I going? Which way am I going?
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a scan of things that tell you a lot, and you're just looking for anomalies, and it gives you a sense of calm. Then you go step out and start figuring out what's the next thing we're doing.
Yeah. Well, we finally at
and
the
that's where the data needs to be. The data needs to be really good too.
Yeah.
Because if it tells you you're heading north and you're heading west, that's a problem, right? So anyway.
For sure. Well, we finally gotten to the 40,000 foot operating level. We've talked about the qualities of a business that can be run at the 40,000 foot level already, but let's talk about what it's like for that individual to be that operator. What does it look like every day? And then what are the things you have to be really good at? So I think of this as like the chairman of the board, someone who's highly involved in the strategy of the company, but not responsible for any of the results, essentially. Not thinking day to day, not thinking week to week, not thinking month to month, but essentially assigning what our priorities are for the business to a CEO and executive team to run with, and then holding them accountable.
Well, Yeah. Are we being consistent with our vision and our mission and our culture? How are we making good decisions based on data? Right. So they're the guys also scanning the instruments. They're getting reports. They're the guy who the venture capitalists or the private equity guys don't. When the private equity guys come around, the guys out in the shop don't know who that is, right?
Yeah.
But they are responsible. They're the figurehead in the middle level management. That they have that person in their mind. Or at least that's the way I imagine it. They're what would WWJD, right? What would the boss do? They're at that level of managing the company too, but they have data, and they are the keepers of the next steps.
Yeah. It's almost like the air traffic control. I'm trying to come up with this analogy on the fly, but air traffic control for the pilot. You've found a new pilot for the plane, and now you're telling that plane, hey, this is where hey, you're off course a little bit, or this is what time I need you to land, or whatever it is. Not that detailed. I don't know that you need the pilot to have
that's
some
a little
autonomy, but
that's getting into operations a little bit.
Yeah.
It's the company that flies that plane. Maybe its vision and mission is. I follow a guy on Instagram that is a missionary pilot, flies a Cessna Caravan in some of the wildest dang. I don't even know where it is, but it's mountainous jungle. But his mission and the mission of the charity he runs is to serve those people. Now, when he flies in, is he high or low? That's up to him and people on the ground who are telling him things.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can get in trouble trying to come up with metaphors.
Yeah, probably a bad metaphor. We'll keep it in, but we'll edit it out. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. It's good.
No. Okay. I think some of their qualities, never really in the office, not required in the office for sure. Keeper of the vision is something that we talked about beforehand, but just really making sure. I have a really good story about this. I learned with this yesterday, actually. So Chick-fil-A in the 90s, most compared to what was once called Boston Chicken, now Boston Market, if you're familiar with it. Not big here in Oklahoma, but definitely on the East Coast and even in Texas and some other areas. It used to be called Boston Chicken. And essentially Boston Chicken's way of growth was having more menu items, offering really good quality, but convenience for all these different items. They rebranded from Boston Chicken to Boston Market, start offering mashed potatoes and gravy and meatloaf and all this kind of stuff, right? So Chick-fil-A was meeting as their executive team, talking about how they're going to grow, how they're going to continue to get bigger. And they were, toying with this Boston Chicken, Boston Market model, more freestanding locations. At this time, they were exclusively in malls, right? And Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, was typically the quiet guy in these meetings and didn't say much, but he banged his fist on the table and he said, if we get better, our customers will demand that we get bigger. And we don't need to try to get bigger to be better. We just need to be better, and then our customers will demand that we get bigger. And that's kind of the level that we're talking of. Let's keep the keeper of the vision, who doesn't meddle in the day-to-day operations or anything like that, doesn't even say much. But when something falls out of line with the vision, just beats their fist down and said, no, we need to get better. And anyways, so that's an example of that chairman of the board, that 40,000 foot operator. I think another thing is you've got to be a very good coach, not someone who's going to be an authoritarian, someone who tells exactly what the CEO needs to do, exactly what the CFO needs to do, exactly what any COO needs to do, but more so coaches them through problems and just acts as a sounding board and a wise sage, if you will, so that they can still have autonomy, they can still do their role, but they have the support they need. They feel like they have someone behind them that understands what's going on and is going to help them think through the problems that they're thinking through, that they're dealing with. So you mentioned one thing, that the valuation of the company, and this probably comes in at the 30,000 foot level as well, but the valuation of the company is top of mind, and it's much less of a focus on the profit and loss statement, right?
Yeah. One thing I'd like to jump back and say is you don't go from anywhere on that scale to 40,000 feet or 30 or to the next level by accident. It's intent. And you have to carve out time because, as you said, the tyranny of the urgent will use all your time. You say, yeah, I'm going to take the steps to delegate and learn it, create systems, but I'm going to do it. I can't do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. And of course, tomorrow never comes. It's always today. So when you have to do that intentionally, among the things you can begin to think about and be intentional about is increasing the value of your company. And just kind of as a philosophy, I say operations deal a lot with the profit and loss statement. Sales minus expenses equal profit. Profit is important to the valuation of the company, but actually a balance sheet is a statement of the value of your company, although it's not a very good statement. I mean, it tells you book value of your company, which we could do an episode on. But when you start thinking about the value of the company, you're making decisions by understanding what buyers want. And a lot of those decisions happen on the balance sheet. The amount of inventory that you have, how much your accounts receivable, how much you have in payables and receivables affects the value of your company. So you start paying attention to those things, capitalizing things as opposed to expensing things because of the way EBITDA works. Anyway, you start looking at what things increase the value of your company, and you pay attention to those and start doing it. And it's a transformation. And if you're doing that, you are concerned with making money. You always have to make money. But if you are concerned with what buyers want, you spend your time doing that. That's where there's a quantum leap between just making some money, making some leveraged money because you've got some employees, to making the kind of money you would make if you sold your business. Right?
Yeah.
So it's all intentional. And as you go through the stages, and I guess that the way you said it was you can see farther at each higher level, and that seeing farther starts opening up opportunities that, hey, there are people who will buy my business, or there are people who will provide capital at an economic rate to expand my business, or maybe I buy a business, right? So you start thinking completely different than you did when you were driving that truck, and wondering, your big problem was, I've got the wrong address in my GPS. Where am I supposed to be?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we've covered a lot. I think the only things I haven't mentioned that I have on my notes here, other qualities of a 40,000 foot operator, really high emotional intelligence, just understands when a person is,
Right.
worth trusting, worth working with, worth investing into, and can read the room really well. A very long-term mindset, does well with long-term decision making, a master delegator, and just really good at assigning not just tasks, but initiatives to people. Very decisive is another one, just able to make decisions with clarity and with finality. What's the, I don't know, just very decisive, right? And then we've already mentioned this one, but again, keeper of that vision, just very focused long-term and knows the direction we're headed. So
I think I'll add two things that are said, the same thing said different ways, based on my observations. And I've said this before, but really good business owners tend to view vision or the business as an adventure. It's not a task. It's not a threat. They're trials, but that's like people go run marathons too, right?
Yeah.
Why do you do that? It's hard. Well, it's a trial. And said another way, really good business owners tend to like it. It doesn't mean you have to never take a day off and forget the names of your kids, but they like it. It's not like, they don't like it all the time. There's no doubt. But they generally like being in business. They like making decisions. They like playing chess, I guess, if you will. I don't play chess, but making the moves and see what happens, making the next move. And that really, if you hate business, you shouldn't be in business, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really critical one, is that you like it.
Yeah. That's good. Well, hope listeners have enjoyed this one. I'm curious to know where our listeners are in their flight of business, if they're at the ground level still or getting close to that 40,000 foot level, maybe. Would love to hear from you. Send us an email. Tell us what you think about this episode. If we missed anything, if there's things that really resonated with you, and we'd love to hear where you're at. And then lastly, please subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. And let us know if there's any guests or topics you want to have on. We'd love to hear from you. What were you going to say, Martin?
I was just going to say, I got a text while you were talking from a client of mine who was profit and loss oriented all the way up to creating a valuable company, which did sell, which been through due diligence. And I just got a text. The check's supposed to be exchanged on July 1st.
Wow.
And that's the whole evolution, and it's a big check.
That's great.
So it's pretty cool.
Love to hear
that. And that happened during this podcast.
There you go.
Well, not everything happened during the podcast, but
it's that easy.
It's that easy. You can do it during the podcast.
No, that's awesome. All right, Martin. Thank you.
Okay. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Cashflow Contractor. Check out our website in the show notes or visit thecashflowcontractor.com.